about this, but I'd love to hear from your perspective what the phases were, what the focus of each phase was, and then we can get into the challenges and things like that later. But just kind of walk us through the actual sort of structure of the preparation, the best that you remember it.
Yeah. So to my recollection, the first thing that needed to happen was I needed to get a hold of the list and provide that with Ryan. And then we spent some time talking about a goal tempo for each excerpt, as well as I needed to do some homework of matching each excerpt with some interpretations that really clicked well with me. So I spent a few hours listening to my favorite recordings of these excerpts. And it was a fairly short excerpt list compared to some bigger auditions that you might see for like a larger orchestra. I think there were 8 or 9, something like that. But regardless, took some time listening to a few recordings of each from among my favorites, and then choosing one that I felt matched the interpretation I wanted to have. And once I sent that information to Ryan, he provides me with basically a checklist of what I need to be practicing each time I sit down to run the program, how many repetitions I'm going to do, what tempo I'm going to do those repetitions at. And then that's the first part of it. But then the second part of it is recording each and every repetition that I do, listening back to those recordings. And when I'm listening back, I'm looking for holes in my technique, or I'm looking for inconsistencies in my stylistic interpretation. And then really just taking detailed and copious notes on what I'm hearing and discovering so that I have that to refer back to and start the subsequent practice sessions with as a starting point, basically. How'd I do?
Yeah, that's great. That's phase 1. What about phase 2?
So phase 2, things change a little bit. Let's see here.
If you don't remember, I can fill in the gaps. It's all good.
I'm drawing a little bit of a blank here.
Yeah, phase 2. So phase 2, what we do in phase 1 is we just extract all the most technical excerpts, or the unfamiliar excerpts. And so with a list of 8 or 9, that's not going to be very many, but in a list of like 40 excerpts, it can be very helpful to take out the most difficult ones so that you're almost trying to raise the floor, right? You're trying to say these ones that are hard, I'm going to try to get those better to more match the level of the excerpts I'm already familiar with. In phase 2, then we practice all of the excerpts, and you have a 2 repetition scheme. The first repetition is a performance tempo repetition. The second repetition is going to be a drop tempo, where you have the opportunity to drive in any good habits that you want to keep from the performance tempo repetition, or where you can adjust anything necessary and then have the ability to actually imprint good habits because it's slower. And when you practice each excerpt is just dependent on the level of difficulty for you at that time. How's that for a jumping off point?
That's great. And actually, I'm kind of laughing to myself now that I needed the refresher, because listening to you talk about it reminds me that phase 2 is like my favorite phase in the process. And I think it's because for me, phase 2 is usually where I start to see the growth and the improvement. And that gets me really excited and motivates me to keep going. You get that performance repetition, that performance tempo repetition, and it just really reveals like where you are losing your focus or where you are getting off track. And then you have that second repetition immediately after to just try to grind that out or iron that out. And, doing that over a period of several days, going back and listening to a recording from, say, 6 days ago compared to the one today, for me, that's a point in the process where you can really start to see how far you've come in just a short period of time. And that's always really fun and fulfilling. So,
yeah. I want to come back to a couple of things you said about losing focus and motivation, but to finish this part of it out, there's a third and final phase. What can you tell us about that phase?
So the third and final phase, specifically for Audition, is you are doing full run-throughs of the list of excerpts. And the approach that we took was Ryan helped me generate some random orderings of lists. That way I'm playing the full list twice a day in a completely random order. And we would simulate the audition environment a little bit by, I would have 3 to 5 minutes to warm up and do whatever I needed to do on each instrument that I was using for the list, which in this case was 4 different trumpets. So I would get to play on those for a few minutes. then take a short break to sort of simulate how your chops can cool down in that time between when you leave the warm-up room and actually when you get to stage and get to play. And then playing the entire list straight down, taking the same amount of time in between each excerpt that you would take in the actual audition round, and trying to make that as realistic as possible. While I'm doing this, or while anyone is doing this, you've got the recorder running the whole time. And then once you're done with that, immediately listen back to that recording. Notice what went well, notice where you deviated from your plan, notice inconsistencies in terms of time, pitch, style, whatever it may be. While you're listening back to that recording, that's also kind of building in like a natural organic chop break. And then once you've done that, run the list a second time, trying to take all of that input and feedback that you got from the recording and implementing that into your second run through. And that second run through of the list, without fail, for me each time was where I would make big strides and just be able to reinforce good habits and good approaches to the excerpts. So